Your art is inherently connected to your lifestyle in both a metaphoric and a literal way. For you, your art practice is the practice of everyday life, as de Certeau called it. Could you comment on this?
One of the things your question makes me think about is like, well, first of all, every artist's practice is part of their everyday life. And what is it about what I'm doing that somehow kind of redirects that notion from a common notion to something that somehow is principally within how I do is read. The subject of the work has never been lifestyle. It's never been how people live or anything. It's really more, it's a question, one of the things that interested me very early on when I started to work was like, how does somebody like me, with a background like me, that comes from a certain class, and what are the issues that somebody like me can take seriously? And obviously one of them was, what the hell am I doing here? How am I doing this? What is it about? How did I end up stuck in this freaking cultural enterprise? It's basically run by a bunch of white rich people. And as an artist, you sort of start to kind of make these problems that start to pose questions like that about, and it's sort of talk about the issue of where you are, what you are, who you are, why you're here.
One thing I was thinking about, the response to that, is that there's a facet of your practice that deals with desirable lifestyle objects like a certain kind of home, a certain kind of boat, and so forth. I was thinking of it in a more metaphoric way as well, but also thinking of it just quite literally. These are desirable and desired objects that often people of our class, including myself, would not have, these objects would not be available to. And what you've done is to actually make them for yourself, and then they become desirable to those same rich people, but not just as a boat or a nice house, but as an art object, as a nice house or a nice boat.
Yeah, that's a good summation of the dynamic that drives some aspects of the work. I think this is, a lot of the things that I was making, these are things that I couldn't afford and I was interested in sort of participating with, and I was trying to figure out a way to kind of use those objects, that desire in a reflexive way to produce what I thought would be an interesting work. And part of the output of that work, obviously, is what you're saying, that produces this very strange contradiction.
This is sort of a bit of an old chestnut that you've heard me parrot before, but I've tried to put it in a slightly different way. What is it about what you do that makes it particular, or perhaps peculiar is the right word, to fine art and not design or an architecture? And this relates back, I think, a little bit to the conversation I heard you and Schumann have. Is there an inherent difference in the way you approach a commission or project to the way a designer or architect would? Or is it just simply the power of context, i.e. the gallery or museum, over content?
Problems that engaging in these other sort of, kind of sister, cousin, kind of illegitimate sort of practices in fine art are used because these are the things that have the closest proximity to it. So in a way, it's because they're interesting mirrors that allow you to understand and kind of play out the value of what a contemporary art might be in relation to these things that are somehow, historically have either been dependent on them, contingent on them, or looked up to fine art. I went to school at a time when the way architecture worked, it was the dad. Fine art was like the interesting son, and like the applied arts, which I call the minor arts, and I still do, by the way, are these kind of bastards that are always looking to fine art to, deploy some sense of development that people feel happens much more in a pure way in fine art. And to me, that model made a whole lot of sense. I didn't start getting involved with these other practices, running them through what I thought of myself as what an artist should be doing, because I thought that there was some sort of inherent disequilibrium between these things or anything like that. These things were very close. They just seemed like really good objects to kind of start to throw into my bag of tricks and try to sort of ask questions of, what the value of the nature of what artwork, what an interesting artwork. I think there's a group of people in the profession who kind of don't really have interest in engaging, which is perfectly fine and should be. And then there are people who actually forget they're actually being instrumentalized by the work and forget and actually kind of deploy the same ridiculous strategies to the work, only to have the work undermine their position.
Yeah.
It lays bare the reality that there are these different discourses.
Yeah, no, and I think that's what makes it particular. That's strange. All right, the last question. Why the reversal of roles between the catalogue and exhibition, per se?
It's an obvious motion.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's really been addressed as forcefully as we're doing it right now. So, and I think I'm interested in that. The intensity of this kind of manifestation of that problem.
I mean, what's interesting for me, there's two things. The first is that on quite a sort of literal level, is that as someone that makes their living partly or mostly from writing catalogue essays and so forth, is that usually they're just seen as, the catalogue is a supplement to the show, and the essay is a supplement to the images in the catalogue of the show. So it's almost like the text comes third. And so it's interesting for me to see things reversed, although I have a feeling it's not, deconstruct or take apart that opposition on behalf of the writer.
I guess I can. I don't think that it would be so interesting for me to use a writer to lay bare the authoritative hierarchy between what somebody does and then versus having to have somebody say what it really is, who's disconnected to the producer. But I think, in the world we live in, those kinds of cultural building blocks which are occupied by these different professions are never like that. They're never clean. I want to try to make explicit in the work is that work is going to be interesting in the future. It has to behave more like film. It has to behave more like how film is made or how it's produced and what it is. It has to, in other words, the idea that who made it, whose hands touched it, all that stuff has to really find a different discourse that doesn't sort of leave it behind in such a central place. Like I think the critic makes the artwork as much as the art makes the artwork, and the artist makes the artwork, and the institution. What we're trying to get at here is some sense of reality. We're all involved in this sort of ridiculously collaborative process. How do we begin to talk about what's really happening, and not some sort of 19th century version of how to keep your house clean by having a housekeeper and a guy in the kitchen and a guy running your car and stuff like that. It doesn't really work in contemporary culture.
So you become more like a director in a way.
Yeah. I believe that. I think that is the interesting production.
And Rachel, does that make your role akin to that of a producer, or where are you then?
I think I'm actually, hopefully, a questioner, and I feel an interrogator, because to me it's to see if the framework stands up, because I have the problem of representation, and it's something that it's really the fusion of the object and the subject. I think this demands a new approach to interpreting the writing self, which we're doing here, the language, and investigation of the word with the image as well. So I think that's an important notion of power in itself.